All right. Sorry for the delay. We were stuck in elaborate meetings with the senators. Oh, that's right. They went home. I forgot. Thank you. Thank you. I'll be here all week. The same thing, I want to introduce the members, and they can walk you through, and you guys ask some questions if you have them. We'll start with Jennifer Sullivan on term limits. Jennifer.
Thank you. So yesterday we passed HJR 1, which created term limits for a judicial branch of government, 12 years, rather allowing it to go on the Constitution for, allowed it to go on the ballot for the people of Florida to decide, and that is the bill.
Any questions?
Any debate?
Good.
I was curious. You may not have seen the Senate budget yet, but I didn't know whether or not you were aware that the Senate budget has proposed actually giving pay raises to judges, including close to 20% raise for Supreme Court justices.
Next we have Danny Burgess, direct primary. We'll get to those at the end, Gary. Don't try to short circuit a press conference. Next we'll. Okay, go ahead.
And that is the pro-tort reform group, the Florida Justice Reform Alliance, and others have made the point that you carry this idea to its logical conclusion. Neil Gorsuch will only serve 2 years on the United States Supreme Court. What do you think of that way of thinking?
Well, I think that the bill.
He's already served 10 years in the appellate courts. I'm sorry.
Well, the bill didn't address the U.S. Supreme Court. So in regards to, I'm happy to answer questions as it relates to what the policy did for the state of Florida.
They're talking about the concept of a guy who's already spent 10 years on the appellate bench. And
Well,
under this idea, won't be able to have a
okay, first I'd say to the, what was the special interest group?
Justice reform, William Large is weak.
It's important that they understand the difference between the federal court system and the state court system. This applies to the state court system. And the second thing is this applies to appellate judges and Supreme Court justice. So I think they're reading the bill wrong.
So you're saying you can have 8 years on the appellate bench and then be promoted to the Supreme Court and have another 8 years?
Yep.
Or 12?
12 years. 12 years. Danny.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, the House, for the third session in a row, passed overwhelmingly the direct primary care bill. Proud to be the sponsor of this bill this year, along with my prime co-sponsor, Mike Miller. This is a great effort for reform. It should be at the heart of every bit of healthcare reform that we do here. I want to thank the Speaker for his leadership on this issue, and hopefully we can get this across the finish line. I know that it's doing all right in the Senate, and we're hoping to see some good reform get to the governor's desk this year. Any questions?
Why do you think you guys have had such a hard time getting it to that finish line in recent years? This is something the House has been pushing, as you said, for several years in a row.
You know, obviously the House has really believed in this free market, innovative approach to healthcare. It's a process, and sometimes it takes some time to get through that process, but I believe firmly that this could be the year. Thank you very much.
Let's see, Scott Plakin.
Thank you. Today, the House passed House Bill 11, which provides greater transparency, accountability, and sort of democratic principles to public sector labor unions in the state. I'll take questions.
So some of the folks on the other side of the aisle made the comparison to, I believe you had said less than 5% making decisions for the rest. They made comparisons to the 116 elected representatives. What response do you have to that?
Well, throughout the process, it was conflated with our electoral process, and you're talking about different provisions under the Constitution to start. So here you have a small group of people that really aren't even elected by the rest of them. At least we, in each of our districts, are elected by each. Here you have, using my example of 5%, you have the other 95% don't even care enough to pay dues. So I don't think that that's a good analogy. I understand maybe a good talking point sounds good, but I don't think it's apples and apples.
Sir, what about the argument that being a right-to-work state, that encourages people to get a free ride on a union?
Well, the fact is a right-to-work state. That decision was made long ago, so this bill really doesn't address that. It really doesn't change that in any meaningful way, the actual right-to-work portion of the Constitution. So I don't think it.
Do you think that discourages union participation?
I'm sorry, say again?
Do you think that discourages union participation?
My
Right
bill?
to work.
Oh, again, that was decided long ago. I will tell you, in House Bill 11, I think that there's an upside to it that wasn't talked about very much by the other side, is that I've already spoken to some unions around the state. They're using it as a recruitment tool. I've talked to one that said that they, I can't remember which one, but said that they got 3% more membership in one day. I talked to one that said about 49% of the bargaining unit, and they're having a recruitment drive. So for those unions that are being responsive to their members, I think there's actually some upside. If you have a union using that example that's 5% of the bargaining unit, they're going to have a lot of work to do. But it really comes down to, if only 5% are willing to pay dues, it's a real question. Should the other 95% be bound by what these 5% are doing? Thank you.
Next, we have Paul Renner on recovery care centers.
Good afternoon. I'm happy to say that the House passed today our bill with respect to ambulatory surgery centers and recovery care centers, which is a real victory for patients. It increases their access to care and also lowers the cost at a time since 2006 when deductibles have gone up over 300%. This is a big step forward. Currently, we have a nonsensical rule that requires people that seek elective surgery at an ASC to be out by midnight, whether they're ready or not. So what the bill does is it changes that 24-hour period to your 24 hours, 24 hours from your admission until discharge. And that will move us in a great direction toward lower cost and greater access. It also creates recovery care centers for those people that need a little more time of observation, that we do that at the right location and at the right price rather than requiring them to be hospitalized.
Are you at all concerned about the potential that this will disrupt the payer mix in hospitals that rely on both private pay and Medicaid and all sorts of payer sources to keep their books balanced? Are you worried that this might disrupt that existing model?
Not at all, because we're really talking about two different functions. Hospitals play an important function for emergent care, and people, as the bill describes, whether it's at the ASC level before you get surgery or before you go to an RCC, you have to be screened. And if it's determined in the case of RCCs that you need acute hospitalization, you go to a hospital. If you need intensive care, you go to a hospital, or critical care or coronary care. You're not eligible to go to a recovery care center. So this is really about healthy people that get outpatient surgeries and need a little bit of time of observation, not emergent care where someone needs to either begin or go to a hospital.
But doesn't, though, I mean, because right now there are no recovery care centers, so people who needed to stay somewhere would have to go to a hospital anyway. It does interfere with hospitals having those patients. And so there is, I mean, potentially a risk of them losing private pay patients, right?
Not necessarily. I mean, around the country, you actually have people that are coming in from overseas having some of these procedures done, and they're staying across the street in a hotel. And so what we're doing is ACA will come in and license and make sure we have adequate facilities, adequate trained personnel to care for these people in a way that's appropriate, so they're not across the street in a hotel. So I think it's putting, again, people in the right place at the right price and making sure we're customizing care. The same kind of thing we're trying to do in education with school choice is what we're trying to do in healthcare. Thank you.
Next, we'll have Jim Boyd with our tax cut package.
Thanks, Speaker. Good afternoon. Most of you all know yesterday we workshopped the tax package, as we call it, recurring, non-recurring, going forward over $2 billion in tax cuts. Next week we will have the homestead exemption piece, which is about $750 million in tax cuts, additional 25,000 homestead exemption, and also we will take up the bill, the tax package bill, which is a lot of the sales tax holidays and the tax credits that different groups that we've enjoyed over the years participating in will receive. So we're looking forward to rolling that out next week. We had great support yesterday in the committee, bipartisan, I think, interest in it, and look forward to rolling that out next week and getting on with it. So thank you. Yes, yes, Tia.
Your homestead exemption, how, I guess my question is, for next year, the state budget is predicted to get tighter, less robust in some of these out years. Are you concerned at all that you guys are doing a very, very big and permanent tax cut that is going to stifle income when you need it most?
Well, as you know, we've also had some growth in the state, so I'm encouraged by that. We've also, under Chair Trujillo's leadership and the Speaker's leadership, been able to tighten our budget and cut expenses where we can. So I'm optimistic that while it is an aggressive and I think a pretty ambitious endeavor, I'm optimistic that we'll all be able to handle it well.
Representative Boyd,
Yes.
the commercial lease tax
Mhm.
is cut by 1.5%, 2 years, then it goes to just 0.5%.
Correct.
If you're optimistic, why not do what the governor is doing and keep it at 1.5?
Well, you know, the initial cut is 25% is pretty big. And, you know, part of our thought was we've got other issues that come up along the way that other legislators may want to take a look at in terms of tax breaks or tax cuts. So we don't want to tie the hands totally for the future. But with a 0.5%, you know, ultimately the thing's going to go away anyway. So at least we can chip away in large part to begin with, but then over the course of the next years, start to whittle away at the rest of it. And hopefully future legislators will follow what we're doing and continue that.
Well, but it's going to go from, I believe it's 6 down to 4.5, then it's going to go back up to 5.5.
Right.
I mean, if we compare that to how you guys handle the RLE, you're going to call that a tax cut or a tax increase in 2 years. Is it just going to stay at 4.5, and we're calling it?
Well, it's 2.5. It's 25% the first. It's 1.5, and then a 0.5 point for recurring years. So ultimately, hopefully, we'll do away with it all. But there'll be people behind us that will address that. But we're at least chipping away at it piece by piece as we go.
Representative Boyd, back to the homestead exemption.
Yes.
And that is this. There's been support in the Senate from Senator Lee, Senator Simmons, about this idea that we've got 20-some counties in the state that are fiscally constrained and at their taxing capacity right now. And this thing has to be done in a very flexible way so that the Holmes counties and the DeSoto counties don't lose all that. Where's the House stand on working with a formula that protects those counties?
Yeah, we haven't done that. We haven't gotten to that stage yet, Steve. But I know that's, you know, we've looked at that in the past and funded part of that in the past. So I don't. Hopefully, with my colleagues, that we'll be able to come to some landing spot that'll be good for those counties that are ultimately the worst affected. Thank you. Thanks, Speaker.
And finally, you'll have Chairman Appropriations, and to your point, too, he'll walk you through how our budget takes that issue and flips it 180 degrees. So where we were looking at $1 billion deficit next year, maybe a $1.8 billion deficit in the third year of the Revenue Estimating Conference 3-year plan. Now with what we've done with our budget, it's $1 billion surplus next year, and it's $1.3 billion surplus in the third year. So, but I'll let Chairman Trujillo walk you through that.
How are you guys? Good afternoon. We rolled out our budget this week. It's $81.2 billion. I'll just answer questions, I think. So I guess the first question would be, how do we get to a surplus in the out years, and how can we finance a lot of these tax cuts? Our budget year, the next fiscal year, we go from a $1.2 billion deficit to a almost $1.1 billion surplus. And the out years, the year after, we go from a $1.8 billion deficit to a $1.3 billion surplus. The way we've been able to do that is for the first time in at least my time up here, we've gone after recurring projects and member projects and have eliminated a substantial amount of them. We've been much more aggressive with cash balances at the university and the state college system. We've also reviewed hospital funding and hospital rates and have readdressed that. So through those exercises, we were able to identify roughly $2.2 billion in taxpayer money that we could eliminate from the budget.
In the education budget, there's a couple of really hefty items with the $214 million that's coming from those.
It's already embedded into our General Appropriations Act. So if you look at our $81.2, almost $81.3 billion budget, that number is already including those two items, as well as it also includes our tax package that we discussed, as well as the RLE and some of the other initiatives from the House.
How are you funding it? I mean, obviously those weren't in the budget last year, so where's the money coming from this year?
So if you look at our member projects, we're cutting at the House 25%. That's $700 million of member projects. We're cutting 25%. Some of the money's coming from there. University cash balances, we cut back in perpetuity. We clawed back roughly $80 million between colleges and universities of foundation money of operational money that was being used to supplement the foundation. We've cut that money back in perpetuity, which helps us in the out years. Cash balances, the university system has around $840 million in cash balances after their 5% required reserve that we require them to do. We've taken back some of that money. And across the board in every single silo, all my sub-chairmen have done an exceptional job of identifying areas where they could save money. So they've brought additional projects within each silo that we could cut or we could scale back on, and that's what we're able to do it. And one thing that we've really been aggressive on is on member projects. So the biggest growth in the budget, if you look over the last 14 years, has grown 16%. The biggest driver, besides obviously Medicaid and some of the things that really are out of our control, is the member projects. We're doing for water projects and all projects that are considered member projects roughly right under $100 million, which is a lot less for individual members. The savings then go to the greater good and fund these statewide initiatives.
Chairman, the last time you guys tried to force the universities to draw on their cash balances, a lot of them simply cut programs anyways. Is there some mechanism you guys are using to actually make sure that they draw on their cash balances, or is there a possibility that they'll just turn into program cuts?
Well, the reality is I think they have to make those managerial decisions themselves. If there's programs that are not adequate and there's programs that don't meet attendance requirements and that are really not adding value to the university, they should probably cut them. So I think it puts the pressure on the system to be much more efficient and much more creative in how they use the money. So if they want to attain their cuts by cutting programs, that's something that would have to be accountable to their constituency and to their students and to the state. If they want to obtain those savings by just using cash balances, those are decisions that each university can independently make.
So there's nothing that would require them to actually go on cash balances?
There's nothing that will require them, but once you remove the money from their balance sheets, they have to be much more creative going forward.
With the 25% reduction in the member projects you described, explain going forward, what criteria will be used? What will be the criteria to determine Project A gets in the final budget, Project B does not?
So the 25% that we cut is past member recurring projects. So those aren't projects that we've put in this year. Those are projects that in perpetuity, for however long they've been in there, they've been in there. For the first time in my time up here, we've actually taken and analyzed and cut a significant amount of those projects. So if you look at those projects, some of them might be really local and parochial in nature. Some of them might not really have a state impact, so we were very aggressive in identifying those and removing them from the budget. Going forward, and one of the biggest rule changes this year under Speaker Corcoran is that we no longer have recurring member projects. So just from a cultural perspective, and why do the out years look so much better? Because if you add $100 or $200 or $300 million into the budget this year and you do it in recurring funds, next year you have to pay that plus every member's new project. By just changing that one decision to change it from recurring to non-recurring, you don't load up the budget for the legislatures that come after you. As far as the criteria, each subcommittee brings up the bills. They're heard by the members of that committee, and they can make a decision whether they support or not support the project. Once they're voted out, just because they're voted out of the first committee, doesn't mean they're going to be embedded in our first budget. And if they're not in our budget and they're not in the Senate budget, which recently printed, those projects are completely out of consideration. From a cultural perspective and from transparency perspective, it's no longer these projects can't just show up once the budget is printed and everybody's asking how did they get here and who put them in there and what happened. You'll know from now, as we print our budget tomorrow and as the Senate just printed their budget this afternoon, which projects are even eligible for consideration, which members filed those projects, which lobbyists or cities or municipalities are advocating for those projects, and what are the amounts that we're considering. I think just narrowing the scope of that conversation brings a lot of transparency to the system. It also puts us in a much better position to negotiate for projects that are meritorious rather than projects that are politically expedient.
Do you have a number at, what was it, 25% as far as the recurring projects? Do you have a dollar figure of that? I may have missed it.
So it's roughly $700 million, so 25%, roughly $180 million.
Is there a particular area of the budget that has more member projects than others?
Yeah, the larger the silo, the more the member projects. So if you look at TED, it's a lot of trust fund, not too many member projects. If you look at healthcare and if you look at higher education was one of the fattest parts of the budget as far as member projects in perpetuity.
Have you identified how many people you're going to wind up laying off as a result of that? Because, for instance, you call them member projects, but for instance, let's take one of the Charlie Hilton project. That's to hire a professor to teach free market economics over at FSU. The Lou Fry program, again, that's a civic education program at UCF. I'm just kind of curious, have you kind of looked at how many professors and how many programs at these institutions that you're going to shut down as a result of this?
Well, the reality is that a state function. Is that something that the foundations, well, the foundations pay for all those endowed professorships. Why pick the Lou Fry over a professorship at FIU or over a professorship at USF, over a professorship at UF? We fund the base, and our job is to fund the base. The university's job is to make decisions. Where we get into trouble is when we start arbitrarily picking, we want to fund this professor or not that professor, this project but not that project, because that's where we start losing control. And once we lose control and start sending money without any accountability, we end up in the position that we've seen. So is it going to cost them jobs? I don't think so. Do you think UCF, based on what you've seen, they pay their foundation president $540,000. They spend millions of dollars on travel. You think they don't have in their cash balances in their foundation the ability to just find $400,000 to pay for that endowed professorship? Is that a better use to pay for that endowed professorship than to pay for the travel overseas for faculty to go study the Napoleonic Code?
As a follow-up, you brought up Tom, you brought up the salaries of the foundations and everything like that. I'm curious, since we haven't seen the actual language, do you anticipate putting any additional language in the statute or anything like that that places any curbs on those salaries employed by foundations or DSOs in general? We've already had this conversation, which includes athletic coaches across the state.
Well, and there's multiple DSOs. So there's the DSOs that directly deal with institutional university support. There's DSOs that deal with athletics. Our goal for all DSOs, and you'll see it roll out in some of the bills that are forthcoming, is we want complete transparency. You should be able to know as a taxpayer, as a contributor, as an alumnus, where your money's going, how they're using it, what expenditures are being reversed, and how much they're paying. And then it's up to those institutions and to the people who contribute to say, you know what, I don't think it's an appropriate use of taxpayer money for UCF to fly a foundation member first class to Singapore.
So I just want to make sure I understand. You're not going to say, you're not going to tell them you can no longer use your private dollars to augment the salaries that they also get from the state. You're just saying you want them to disclose. Do I understand what
No, we want complete disclosure. And one thing that we're doing as a state, the state taxpayers are not augmenting your fundraising. So as we clawed back the $80 million roughly between the colleges and the university, in perpetuity, we're saying for years you've used taxpayer money to pay for fundraisers. Those fundraisers send money to your foundations. That foundation has absolutely no transparency and no scrutiny. We're no longer doing that.
But so if a university president has $225,000 of their salary paid by the taxpayers, the rest paid by a foundation, or an athletic coach has a couple $100,000 paid by the taxpayers, but then the rest of their salary is augmented by a booster organization, that's going to continue. It's just a matter of whether or not we're going to create a mechanism to make sure that people know how much these people are getting paid.
Yeah, there's going to be complete transparency as far as expenditures, salaries, and revenues, and across the board.
The budget includes zero for conservation easements and land acquisition, generating some criticism from the agricultural commission act. Do you think that the voters in 2014, when they approved Amendment 1, approved zero for land acquisition?
Well, if you look at, let's break it down. Let's look at easements. If you own a home, you're purchasing an easement. What we're basically doing, we're buying an easement on your single-family home and saying, guess what? You have to use it as a single-family home. And we're going to give you a bunch of money for you to do that. Is that really what taxpayers want? Do taxpayers want to buy easements on properties in order for them to continue to be used in the same place they're being used now? So we're giving taxpayer money to large landowners. These landowners then give us an easement, which is not completely revocable. I think the entire program, when you analyze the land conservation through the easement process, if we want the land, we could purchase land. I would agree. We have more than enough land that we can manage. I think if you look at our budget, we have to make informed decisions and we have to make tough decisions. We can't be all things to all people. So just going out and saying we're going to buy a bunch of land that we can't maintain, when we have rivers that are polluted, when we have all sorts of issues with our beaches that need sand, we're just going to go buy more land. I don't think that's the best use of taxpayer money, not particularly in this year, not when we spent over the last 4 years, possibly even over the last 5 years, a significant amount of money on conservation easements and on land acquisition.
Do you think Amendment 1 said that, or buying more land?
I don't think Amendment 1 said it's for all land conservations, it's for streams, it's for rivers, it's for agriculture, it's for preserving the environment. I don't think Amendment 1 specifically said you must go and purchase lands.
But there is also the issue of purchasing lands for cleaning water, and you make a reference to the polluted water, and there's this whole controversy about whether you buy land to help clean up Lake Okeechobee and prevent the discharges, whether it's north of the lake, south of the lake. There is an idea that you could be buying some land. And you're saying no, that's not what Amendment 1 money should be used for?
I'm not saying that it should not be used for buying land. I'm not saying, but what I'm saying is that every single year we don't have to run out and purchase land. Amendment 1 at no point says every single legislature from here on out must go and purchase land.
But what about just talk about this year?
So talking about, I think, the Everglades issue, 2 years ago, possibly 3 years ago, University of Florida, we paid them $250,000, $300,000 to conduct a study. And that study is going to analyze what's the best use of money going forward in order to clean up the Everglades and to complete projects. In their study, the first recommendation to the legislature is finish the projects that are currently under construction. And I spent some time, was fortunate to spend some time with Marco Rubio in Washington, D.C., right prior to the beginning of session. They've worked on this plan for over 20 years. There's buy-in from Wasserman Schultz and Bill Nelson on one extreme to Diaz-Balart and Marco Rubio on the other. I think there's a plan in place for us to say we're going to complete all these projects on the hope and a prayer that the federal government one day will reimburse us this money. They told us I would not take that bet. Those were.
You're only addressing one piece of that very lengthy report, and I don't think they were ordered in order of priority. One of those is you must buy land, and it said you must buy land north of the lake, you must buy land south of the lake. And everybody always seems to want to cut it off before that particular point in that report. You have money, as the voters have dedicated from Amendment 1. Why aren't you putting any of that money into that particular result that was outlined in that FUF report?
So I think we are. I think if you look at the SEP and the SERP projects, if you look at the land acquisition trust funds, if you look at all the different areas that we're spending money on conservation, if you look at some of the different proposals, I think we have to build, if you look at, and one of Negron's points, and I think it was well taken, is you have to secure the dike and the levee around Lake Okeechobee. That's a multi-billion-dollar project. That's something that will affect anybody south of the lake as far as from flood zones and insurance rates going forward. That's a multi-billion-dollar project that the federal government has to put in half the money. Are we dedicated and committed to doing some of that? Absolutely. If you look at in this particular year, I want to say we have about $100 million left in a different silo for Everglades and for other different land issues. And there's, I think, specifically about $20 million for Everglades project of construction. But I would have to go back and look at that specific silo. I'm sorry? They're paying 100% of the dike, but they don't have the money to start the construction. Not the Hoover? Okay. We were up there speaking to them, and maybe it was the dike or some of the levees, but I know there's a 50-50 match, and for part of it, they haven't started the construction and don't have the money to start the construction.
Mr. Chair, on education, the House has put quite a bit of money into that silo, but yet per student spending would only see a modest increase compared to the Senate's proposal. What's the logic behind that, and is that the end all, or is there room for?
So I think that you look at per student funding, I think there's a much bigger picture than just what we put into the FEFP. There's obviously federal money that comes in, there's Title I money that comes in, there's money that comes in from a lot of different sources of revenue. Our end goal is for children to have a quality education. Us just putting arbitrarily a bunch of money in the FEFP for them to go down to the school boards and be collectively bargained, I think we continue to find that we get the same outcomes that some of us aren't happy with. So our approach is going to be different. Our approach is going to be really looking at those low-income charters that drag people out of generational poverty, looking at how do we give parents the choice and the ability to control the educational outcomes of their students. And if you look at a lot of legislation and our funding priorities, we move to address those goals.
I'll take a few more questions and we'll call it a day.
The hospital funding. Just talk about your philosophy that has resulted in this budget.
Yeah, well, we've said it from the get-go that we've created a leadership team, and the leadership team, we all, sit down, talk about these different priorities, different levels of expertise by the members of the leadership team, and go through it and say, where do we want to be in all those silos? And so it's an equal team. You can talk to any of them. All of us have one vote. No one has veto authority, and we sit there in majority rules. And that's how and obviously one of the big focuses that was just addressed is in K-12 education, having walked around and read and examined all of these failure factories, when you're talking about the richest country in the world, is just unacceptable. And so in the K-12 space, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars, more than ever before, to say that it is reprehensible that you would take a child and make them stay in a failure factory, not for 1 year, not for 2 years, not for 3 years, not for 4 years, but 5 years. That whole system has to end, and so we're going to fund it in a way that we think ends that system. And the current way we fund it has not ended that system, as we witness. So hopefully this will work, and I think Schools of Hope hopefully will be a beautiful thing. And as Chairman Trujillo said, when you can get those people and those students to the people to come and then educate those students so that they no longer have that generational poverty, and they have dignity and they have a future, that's a priority. And we've talked about that a lot.
Sorry to harp on the commercial lease tax, but based on the bill analysis for the proposal you guys have, in 2020, that 4.5% rate goes up to 5.5%. You guys have been very adamant about not raising taxes.
Not raising.
2020, that seems like that's what's going to happen.
No, and that's what I was going to say. I think the issue with your question, when you ask Chairman Boyd, you're asking me is that you're a half-empty kind of glass guy. I think it'll be a 1.5% cut moving forward. How we fund it this year, at the future legislators are going to look at that and they're going to say, and it's no different than what we're facing right now with the constitutional amendment for the 10% cap on growth in your property taxes for non-homestead exempted property. It's up. It was a 10-year thing or whatever it was. It's up. What's happening? We're going to pass it again. It'll go back to the voters and we'll pass again. I don't know of a situation in my time where something like that wasn't reinstated permanent. Lee.
After the Agriculture Appropriations Committee scaled back this fresh from Florida program in the Agriculture Department, we saw a statement from Commissioner Putnam called it a political assault on a good program that's going to hurt families. Can you speak to why that decision was made and maybe the commentary he's making? He's suggesting political motivations.
No, I mean, I saw Commissioner Putnam the other day. There's no political motivations. I think what we've talked about is in the last 2 years, all of us, most of us being here, you saw tremendous, in many cases, inexplicable growth in the ag slash environmental part of the budget. And the other one you saw was somewhat inexplicable, massive growth in the healthcare part of the budget. And so what we did is we were going back and looking, okay, what were the funding mechanisms and what were the amounts, looking back 2 years ago in those silos, and tried to create a better equilibrium of where we thought that funding should be, and that's all we're doing. And it's really, it's an advertising program. We're not, we maintained funding for research for citrus greening, which is important for jobs and families in the industry. But spending the recurring and non-recurring amounts for advertising just weren't as essential in our opinion to the other things that we think are more important.
Senate President Negron's plan to buy that land and build a reservoir south of Lake O. Will it see the light of day over in the House? Do you plan on considering it, or is it not going to be an issue with the Senate bill?
Have they sent it over to us?
I think the concern is that they don't have, there's nothing over in the House, so I think there's concern that it's not going to be heard.
Well, they should follow our lead. We're never concerned with the fact that something's not moving in the Senate. We keep sending stuff to them left and right. They should follow our lead.
Do you plan on considering the deal at all? Or?
We're all waiting with bated breath to see what the Senate sends us.
Speaker, can you, the Senate passed its gambling bill today. The House Commerce Committee cleared the House gambling legislation. Senator Galvano said he expects some kind of conference process to happen parallel to budget conference. Can you explain your understanding of the process and how is the money involved in that going to implicate in the budget?
Well, it's got a long way to go. I think that Chairman Diaz has been in conversations with President-designate Galvano. I think Chairman La Rosa has been in conversations. Those are ongoing. I mean, it's a heavy lift. There's a reason it hasn't been passed in decades. But this is the first time, and that anyone probably could recall where you have two bills moving. To the extent that the Senate bill should be over next week. We could have the House bill on the floor next week, and it puts them in a posture and a position to see where that negotiation goes. But I think I would still say it's a heavy lift. I mean, there's a reason it hasn't passed for a decade. But I think that Chairman Diaz and the President-designate and Chairman La Rosa are doing a good job working together. We'll see how that unfolds. I mean, there's nothing set in stone at this point.
And if nothing happens, then what?
Well, we didn't put it in our budget. I haven't looked at the Senate budget. I don't think they put it in the Senate budget. If Chairman Trujillo is, I don't think they put it in this. I think it's generally considered an irresponsible budgeting practice to budget money that's not in there. That's why in the past, when we had issues over the LIP funding, we didn't put the LIP funding in our budget until we knew we had the LIP funding. I think that's a general accounting appropriations practice that's utilized by both the House and the Senate. So I doubt it's in there.
Speaking of lift, the Senate kind of contemplates in their healthcare budget some $600 million of possible lift. They say that the conversations have been positive. I didn't know if anybody from the House has been involved in those conversations with the federal government, with the governor, on possibly bringing some of that money over.
Yeah, both those that are involved, the recipients, CEOs of the hospital, as Chairman Trio mentioned, Senator Rubio, he's called probably twice since session started to keep us updated. His staff and himself are doing a fantastic job, and it looks promising, but we'll see. And they know our timeline. They know our schedule.
Can you comment a little bit about the policy of the Housing Trust Fund and why you think it's important to sweep that money and put it into GR again? We have watched as your community, Miami-Dade community, many communities around the state are really struggling with workforce housing and the kind of the need and incentive to do that. So this money is dedicated for that. Why do you think it shouldn't go into that dedicated area and instead should just go into GR?
I think that we, in our budget, we have funded it at the level that it was funded last year in the House budget before it went off the floor. Every year in conference it goes up a little bit more. I think that I wouldn't say that our funding mechanism with ship and sale was anything different. The question is that we look at all the priorities. We look at all those things. To the extent that there's needs, literally, Mary Ellen, there's a need everywhere. There's a limitless need everywhere. Our question is, how do you take and transform a state and have the greatest impact to make it better, to give people greater opportunities? And so we make those funding decisions. We still have hundreds of millions of dollars funded, or 180 some million dollars funded. Yeah, we swept some additional money, and that additional money now goes to helping with things like Schools of Hope. And we think that's a better way of spending taxpayers' money.
But when it comes to housing, somebody could argue that you're looking at the gap, at the glass half empty. And rather than putting money into something that would get people onto the cycle of home ownership,
No.
really supportive of.
No, you just said workforce housing. Now you're talking about that housing is funded.
Right, you fund the
I'm
workforce
going to say.
then they can leave once they
Yeah,
get stabilized, then they can buy
that housing is for those people who are in difficult situations. That housing is funded. Now, as you see, here's what happens when you say, okay, the certain amount of our doc stamps is going to go into this fund, and this fund's going to be used for these purposes. Well, those things, the doc stamps exploded. What we should have said is we're going to have a certain amount that's going to go to affordable housing. And so what has happened is affordable housing has grown around this huge source of money. So it's no longer those people who cannot afford housing. Now it's those people who struggle to afford adequate housing, but they're fully salaried and employed people. So now we want to say, okay, now because the cost and the rise of housing has gotten this much higher, let's grab these people. And I also think that one of the things that we talked about in our leadership meeting is the housing industry, affordable housing industry, has been racked with not repugnant scandal. It's been rocked with absolute graft and corruption resulting in prison sentences. I think there needs to be reform in that whole thing. So to the extent that we go down that path, I think right now for me personally, I'm more concerned with maintaining that funding level that's existed over the last several years, which we have, and then going in there and cleaning up the graft and the corruption. I'll take one more question.
You said something, I just want to clarify something. You mentioned a couple times in these leadership meetings that you mentioned that you take a vote on things and you have an authority. So I want to make sure I understand that. So you're having meetings with your leaderships where you all are basically actively discussing public policy, and you're not noticing those meetings or letting the press or public be aware that you're taking policy decisions in these meetings?
Every single week I meet with almost what's the agenda look like, and I have talked to the education guys, not every single week, but talk to the commerce guys. What does it look like? And in those conversations, hey, where are you guys on this particular issue? What do you think about this? Those conversations take place every single hour of every day. They take place on the floor. Yeah, to the extent that we have those and we're taking those positions. I mean, this is really stuff that was going on earlier in the big scheme of coming up with what our agenda would be moving forward prior to session. And then it's just managing. Okay, here's the things that we talked about. Where are we on those issues? I'll take one more and then we'll call it a day.
Earlier, last year, there was a bunch of South Florida elected officials that asked the governor to declare a public how certain are you, and this is one issue, but how certain are you that the political capital that you would River Scott, Senator Negron, and are putting behind major issues is at the top of your agenda matches up with the needs of the state?
I mean, we're all elected. We're all in districts with 100 in the House, 170 some thousand people. We're in rotaries. We're in chambers. We're knocking door to door. I think that every member brings to the table a degree of expertise and knowledge of what those critical things are for the district, and that's when we come together and work as a group. The governor travels the state all the time. Senators participate in the same thing, and you see, I mean, Senator Negron comes from an area where clearly environmental funding is a big issue. I come from an area where we had failure factories shut down. Big issue. You see people bringing all those things to the table and figuring out what those important things are, and we try to move forward and fund them to the best of our ability, and we'll continue to do that. Thank you very much.